Hey folks, Antonio Arellano here. Welcome to a conversation with Mike Collier, Democratic candidate for Texas Lieutenant Governor. Texas is on the tip of the tongue of so many nationally, and this race is one of the most important ones. The Lieutenant Governor office is arguably the most powerful office in Texas, and this is why we need to get to know a little bit more about our candidates. Meet Mike Collier.
This is about what's right and about our rights. Now, it's not in my nature to be hyperbolic or sound false alarms. It's in my nature to see the best in people and believe deeply in Texas. But the reality is as hard and as perilous as this. Our fundamental rights are hanging by a thread with a knife hovering over them. And Texas is the place where this is happening right now. These next weeks and months will tell us, will that thread be cut? We have challenges as basic as keeping the lights on. But it's hard to think of anything right now except our rights. Our right to vote is under assault to benefit one political party. Our simple right to keep our kids safe in schools and our communities safe from a deadly virus has been ripped away from us. And for a woman, her right to control her own body has been taken from her. You know, as Sam Houston said, do right and risk the consequences. Now, I'm not the first Texan to quote old Sam, but when do politicians ask, is this right? Too many don't. They ask, what's in it for me and my career and my power? Because there are consequences to doing right. If you do right, you might be attacked. You might just lose an election. So it's just easier for politicians to say, I fought for this, and I blocked it to another.
That night, there are more important things than living.
Spin it. Claim, well, I always do right. And now with our rights hanging by a thread, we need leaders who will do right, even with the consequences. This moment is perilous, but the opportunity to protect our rights, to mend our social fabric, to keep the lights on, to educate our children, and do so much more is before us.
And now I'm joined by Democratic Lieutenant Governor candidate Mike Collier. Mike, how's it going?
Fine. How are you, Antonio? Good to see you.
How's Houston treating you?
Well, I've been on the road. I just got back last night after, I think 28 days, 4,500 miles. So I'm glad to be home. I slept like a baby last night, but I worked all day today. This is an important race.
That's right. That's right. One of the most important races in the state. So let's dive right on in. One
Terrific.
of the conversations that's being had nationally about Texas is about voter suppression. And we saw this happen as a result of the historic record-breaking voter turnout in 2020. This crackdown on voter suppression codified as election integrity. Talk to me a little bit about your perspective as to what Dan Patrick's trying to do here.
Well, first of all, I believe everybody should vote. I believe in democracy. I want to see people vote. I want to make it easy to vote. We do not have an election integrity problem in the state. That is a false assertion. What we see the Republicans doing is making it hard for some people to vote. And the reason why they're doing that is they want to remain in power, even though they are not responsive to our hopes and dreams and fears. So Democrats fight so that everybody can vote. There were some very innovative things that happened, particularly, for example, in my county, in Harris County, drive-in voting, 24-hour voting. These things are good. I mean, voting hours so that you can work and raise a family and vote. These things are good for democracy. Republicans are against that. And so we have to reverse some of these things. And I hope everybody understands that Republicans are coming after your right to vote.
Yeah, and it seems like they're trying to dilute the power of the electorate. Some of the people that are targeted, groups that are targeted by this election integrity, quote unquote, approach is folks that have language barriers, folks with disabilities, that 24-hour drive-through voting that you just mentioned. And it also emboldens poll watchers to target people based on political affiliations. And I'm glad that you brought up the point that it's important to note that there's no widespread voter fraud happening in Texas. So why are they doing it?
Well, I think they're doing it because they can. They're doing it because they think they can. And they're doing it because they're achieving a political objective, which is to remain in power despite the fact that they are no longer responsive to Texans. They don't want people to vote because they're afraid they're going to get beat. Guess what? That's the nature of democracy. And look, for example, at who they just appointed, if it's confirmed, as Secretary of State. The person who's responsible for all of our voting in the state is somebody who believes in this big lie controversy. Yeah. Look what they've done with gerrymandering. I mean, let's don't forget gerrymandering. The state is changing. And the number of Hispanic, Black, and Asian voters is increasing. Yet when they drew those districts, they didn't change it to reflect that. They are disenfranchising voters that they think will vote against them. That's anti-democratic. It's very bad for the state. This Democrat will fight very hard against that. People need to vote.
There you go. Let's talk about those solutions that we can put into place. Texas is one of the only states that does not have automatic voter registration. It's one of the only states that does not have online voter registration for everyone. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to address and course correct some of these issues?
I think that we should survey 50 states and find best practices. This is something that I do in the business world all the time. Find best practices. Where are the innovations? What states are doing things really well so that they're encouraging and helping and assisting people to vote? Let's make darn sure that it's safe. I mean, it has to be safe. We don't want to create voter integrity problems. So let's make sure that it works. But when it works, let's do it here. Let's be innovative, whether it's, drive-through voting, whether it's 24-hour voting, whether it's, I don't like the idea of poll watchers at all. That's a terrible thing. Being able to help one another get to the polls, that's a very important part of who we are. People need help getting to the polls. I say that we should look at all of our laws in the state, find those that are clearly written to prevent people from voting, and get those laws off the books. Then let's go and find innovative ways to get people to the polls. Everyone.
That's right. So let me just make sure that we're clear on this. In terms of automatic voter registration, you turn 18, you're eligible to vote, you get registered to vote. Do you support that?
I support that.
And online
Absolutely.
voter registration. We're dealing with the digital generation, the younger and younger electorate. Do you support online voter registration as well?
I support it. Absolutely.
Great. And now we're talking about these people that are going to be impacted by what's already in the books, this election integrity BS that was pushed through. How are we going to be able to re-engage those folks who are going to be disenfranchised by this?
Well, I think, we'll see what the courts allow and what the courts disallow, and then we're going to have to play the hand that we're dealt, even if we don't like it. And so it comes down to a number of things. First of all, the campaigns, and I hope to be the nominee and I hope to work on this, the campaigns have to do their part in terms of communicating to voters the importance of voting, making sure that there isn't mystery or uncertainty. Often that's what prevents people from voting, making sure that they feel safe. They're going to be poll watchers. Let's make sure that we have the right people there so that people aren't intimidated. Do all that we can as campaigns to contribute to voter security. Then the party has their part to play, and all of the local county party organizations have their part to play, and community leaders have their part to play. We must approach this as a complex management challenge with a view towards making sure people are comfortable, safe, and cast their vote. And that'll be a very important part of what we do as candidates.
You're absolutely right. And I would be remiss, Mike, to not mention that today the Supreme Court heard opening oral arguments on Texas's abortion ban. If the Supreme Court upholds this law, what would you do as Lieutenant Governor to make sure that women have the right to choose?
This law is a terrible law. It's it's mocking the Constitution. It's mocking a woman's right to choose, which is a right that's protected in the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. Republicans did this because they're trying to be clever, and it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Democrats believe that a woman has a right to control her destiny, her body, her health care, every bit as much as a man, and we don't support anything that mocks or challenges or degrades that right, which is precisely what this is. As Lieutenant Governor, if that law is still on the books, and if it's upheld by the Supreme Court, we will reverse that law, fight to reverse that law because it's bad law.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it deputizes civilians. It puts a bounty on Texans' heads. It's a draconian policy. Why are Republicans so comfortable with pushing forward this type of legislation when the majority of Texans and Americans oppose it?
Oh, I don't think they really care much about what the majority of Texans want. I mean, that's the major theme in Texas politics today, which is the Republicans only care about their primary, and their base is shrinking, and they're pandering to that base, and they're utterly indifferent to what the majority of Texans want. And that's not democracy, and that's not good. And look what that law will do. First of all, wealthy women can have access to whatever services they need. We're talking about a real hurt for poor communities, which isn't right. It's not right on any level. And they're only doing it because they want to win their primary. They don't care about the majority point of view. A big part of this election cycle is to say, look, the majority point of view needs to be the law in this land. And we are being held, in my opinion, in the grip of a very small number of Texans who control power through what I consider to be corrupt means. And with redistricting, it's going to be very hard for us to have more of a voice in the House and Senate. But we can elect a Democrat governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and on down the line, and we must.
Absolutely. Let's turn now to permitless carry law, right? And September 1st, this new law went into effect saying that anybody in Texas can carry a gun without any training or without any permit. This comes on the heels of one of the largest massacre of Mexican Americans in El Paso. What's your take, and how would you address gun safety in Texas?
I think what happened in El Paso was just unbelievably awful. And my heart continues to break. And I pray for those people whose families were shattered, lost their lives, and families were shattered. We must be honest with one another about gun safety. As to permitless carry, I'm against it. I think it's terrible law. The majority of Texans agree with me. License to carry made sense because you had some control over who had a gun. We don't have any control over who has a gun now. Can carry a gun anywhere they want to. Could be a terrorist, somebody who's violent, spousal abuser. And then we've thrown gun safety out the window. I mean, I was raised in a gun culture, a hunting culture when I was a kid. It's all about gun safety. And the majority of Texans despise that law. And by the way, later in this program, I hope we talk about creating good paying jobs, which is an important part of what the lieutenant governor should be working on. There are businesses that are thinking about not creating jobs in the state because of permitless carry and many of the other things. So when I think of guns, I think of a couple of things. First of all, I spent a lot of time talking to Moms Demand Action. For those that are listening, Moms Demand Action is a wonderful organization. I spend a lot of time with them. These are mothers of children in schools, and they're concerned about guns. And here's what they advocate, and I'm with them. Go back to having a license to carry so that we have some control over who has a gun, and training. That's essential. Then we need to go further. I think we need to have background check systems that work, which we do not have now. And red flag laws. If somebody is a clear danger to the community, go see a judge, make your case, let a judge, because we have to protect all of the amendments, including the Second Amendment. However, if somebody is a clear danger to themselves and their community, go to a judge, present your case, then that gun's removed until we figure out if that person is a real danger and it's temporary. These Moms Demand Action, I think they're perfectly sensible. I think the majority of Texans agree with them. So not only, to summarize, do we need to reverse permitless carry, but then we need to take these two additional steps, background checks and red flag laws. Then we'll be on the right path, in my opinion, in terms of gun safety.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up school shootings because I did want to talk about that. Unfortunately, Texas has had its share of violence on school campuses. And I know that you also understand and have been, like you just mentioned, communicating with Moms Demand Action and other groups. Do you believe in the future Texas will be able to course correct this action and keep students safe?
Well, first, let me say that I got to know Rhonda Hart. If you all don't know Rhonda Hart, I beg you to listen to Rhonda and her point of view. She lost her daughter, Kimberly, at Santa Fe in high school. Kimberly was murdered. And Rhonda and I have talked about this. And all she wants is for our political leaders to do what they said they would do when they looked her in the eye and said, Rhonda, we're going to work to solve this problem to keep schools safe. If you ask Rhonda, I believe that she will tell you they have not done it. They have done nothing. We need to act. Now, what do we do? First of all, I don't think that we want to militarize, for example, our schools with hardened exits and entries and metal detectors and so forth, because I think schools need to be a very welcoming place where people feel good. They need to feel safe, feel good, feel free intellectually. A big part of the problem, in my opinion, is that we have class sizes that are too big and we don't have enough counselors and we don't have enough special education teachers. And so we aren't doing right in terms of how we're organizing inside the classroom. These steps will help reduce the danger because we'll have more and better relationship with the students and have a better idea when trouble's coming, then we know it's coming and we can react. I think that's a huge part of it. And then also counseling, mental health support, all of those things work together. In my opinion, the state is falling woefully short on all of those things. And that contributes to the danger that we all feel. Yeah. And my kids are grown. It won't be long, I suppose, before I have grandchildren. So I'll be back to worrying about, when my kids were in school, I didn't worry about a gunman. But parents now do. And that is not right. And we need to take the steps, as outlined a minute ago, in my opinion, to begin to deal with this so that I can look Rhonda Hart in the eye and say, Rhonda, I did what we discussed.
It's absolutely not right, and you're correct in saying that the current lieutenant governor has failed in terms of activating gun safety as it should in
That's
the
right.
state of Texas. Another way that Dan Patrick has failed Texans is in the COVID pandemic management. And I'm sorry, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has gone as far as early on attributing the COVID pandemic to immigrants, and then additionally the Delta spike to Black Texans. Your response?
Well, I think it's just horrific what he's done. I mean, at the beginning of COVID, I mean, with Dan Patrick, it's all about headlines and politics and spin and whatever is going to help him, win his next election, regardless of what it means to people's health, well-being. How many families have been shattered because of his gross negligence as to COVID? The fact that he said that the second wave was due to Black people is just racist through and through. The fact that he blamed immigrants is racist through and through. The fact that he went on Fox News at the early stage of this pandemic and said that old people, grandparents ought to die. It's just, you just can't believe that he said that. Well, guess what, Mr. Patrick? A lot of grandparents did die and a lot of grandchildren died. His response and other leadership in the Republican Party has been absolutely disastrous for the state. We did not have to have 65,000 plus Texans die because of COVID. Where they failed, the fundamental issue, in my opinion, is that they welcomed the politicization of dealing with this thing. We should be encouraging people to wear masks, keep their distance, give people good information about vaccines. So many more Texans would have done the right thing when it would have helped if they had given good information and encouraged and motivated. I don't like mandates. I don't like mandates. I hope we never get into the business of mandates in terms of vaccines, for example. But they didn't do that. They politicized it. And because they politicized it, wearing a mask became, or not wearing a mask became an act of defiance. Getting a vaccine or not getting a vaccine became an act of defiance because it was politicized. And so I think this is terrible what they've done. And then I think about the poor parents whose children, they had no choice but to send their children to school. And those schools might have said, okay, kids, we're going to wear masks. And that's what the local leaders said. We trust our local leaders. That's why we have local leaders. They're in our community. We build our relationships with them. We elect them. We speak to them. We know them. They said our children are going to wear masks. And Governor Abbott said, no, you're not. That was just unconscionable. So I'm very critical of the leadership. Dan Patrick, Greg Abbott, the whole lot have really blown it. And it's just so awful what it's done to families.
You're absolutely right. And far too many Texans have died as a result of the mismanagement of COVID. We absolutely need accountability at the ballot box come next November. Mike, let me ask you about schools. So in terms of mask mandates in schools, there's been a lot of controversy and a lot of really heated conversation at school boards about mask mandates for children. Your take?
Well, I think, I believe in local control. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, I think that we should, it's not easy if you're sitting on a school board or if you're a superintendent. These are not easy decisions to make. People are emotional, but that's where the decision should be. The decision should be at the school board level with the superintendent. They're more likely to get it right. And what's good for a school in Harris County may not be good for a school in Bexar County, may not be good for a school, out in deep rural Texas. I have faith in our local leaders, and they should decide. Most of the school boards, to my knowledge, most of the school boards, certainly many of the school boards, have concluded that the children ought to wear masks. I know that the teachers want that in the worst way. Parents want that in the worst way. So if that's what the school board decides, then the children should wear masks. And the fact that the political leaders at the top of Texas came along and said, thou shalt not, I think it's unbelievable that we gave the governor emergency powers to implement public safety measures. We didn't give him emergency powers to cancel public safety measures. What they did was very wrong. I say we go back to local control. And let me say this, let's take it one step further. Whereas I believe in local control, if there's a school board out there who's clearly doing the wrong thing for the wrong reasons, it's still their decision. But there's an awful lot that a lieutenant governor can do to wade in and ask a lot of hard questions. Why is this happening? Are you sure you're right? Providing the information, providing the motivation, using the bully pulpit to try to provide the leadership. So ultimately we do the right thing in our communities.
Bold and fearless leadership is what Texas really needs.
Absolutely.
We're moving forward in the way that we need to. Another unfortunate failure is, let's talk about the power grid, right? As a Texan who experienced our February winter freeze, The winterization was a suggestion made to our government prior to the freeze, but those recommendations were not taken into effect, and as a result, many Texans died. And I haven't seen accountability for the deaths that were caused by the fact that the government couldn't keep the power on. Your response?
Well, I think it's just absolutely terrible what happened. And, I make my living in the energy industry. I've done an awful lot of work in the power and renewable space. I've known for some time that we were headed towards trouble because the grid, which was designed by Enron, for those of us to remember Enron, and what was a criminal element inside of Enron, and we all know that a number of people went to jail. They designed this grid. They designed the grid so that it would be profitable for companies, costly to Texans. I have known for some time that we would end up in trouble in the summer because we didn't have enough energy generating capacity for a growing state. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, is the legislature had been warned repeatedly over a decade. If it freezes, we're in trouble. You better winterize. The ERCOT went so far as to saying, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And the legislature at each and every turn has ignored those warnings and recommendations. And we're sitting here now with winter coming after the worst freeze. And by some estimates, 700 Texans died, $100 billion in damage. How many of us suffered? How many businesses lost money? How many pipes burst? How many ceilings are ruined? How many vacations and retirement nest eggs have been basically obliterated because we got to fix the house, fix the pipes, fix the floor. And now winter's coming and they haven't done a thing.
Yeah.
Just like the last time they ignored the warnings.
Yeah.
And they aren't going to do a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons why they aren't going to fix the grid, Antonio, is because they do not work for us. And that leads me to a very important part of my campaign, which is that I'm not going to take any money from any corporation or any corporate PAC. We need a lieutenant governor who works for Texans. And that's the problem. The legislature is not doing their job. They are not mandating winterization. They're giving these guys a pass. They're letting everybody blame the other guy, and nothing is happening, and winter is coming, and that is absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we saw this past legislative session, this kind of fall through the cracks when they were focusing so hard on stripping people from their right to vote. It's almost ludicrous to see how our government has their priorities all mixed up. This is also a result of climate change. That's inevitable, that's happening, and that's real. And young voters are looking closely at their candidates to see where they stand on making Texas a climate justice leader. And how do we tap into the renewable energy that exists in the state to bring in some economic boost? Your take?
Young people are very wise to worry about what's happening with the climate. I'm worried. We should all worry. Some say that we're past the point of no return. I pray that we're not, but it says there's a real sense of urgency about what's happening in the climate. The good news is Texas can lead if we want to. We can be the leader when it comes to new technologies so that we address climate change. Texas has always been the leader when it comes to energy. It's time for us to step up and lead the renewable. You know, the energy transition is going to happen with or without us. And so we can decide that we want to lead it, which I believe we should, or we can decide that we're going to just put a wall around our oil industry and try to protect that, and we end up becoming the laggard. If we're the laggard, we'll become the laughingstock. We need to lead the energy transition. And by the way, when we lead the energy transition, it's going to create a lot of jobs. It's going to create a lot of good paying jobs. It's going to create a lot of good paying union jobs. We need to be thinking in those terms too. What does that mean? We should encourage investment in wind and in solar, but we also need to encourage investment in enabling technologies for wind and solar, such as storage, such as smart grid. We also need to be thinking about building materials, land use, carbon capture. There's so many things. We also be, to the extent we have oil and gas industry, which we will need the gas, we'll need the liquid for other uses. It needs to be done cleanly. We can't be flaring. We can't be belching methane into the atmosphere. If we lead, the rest of the world will follow and learn from us. We will prosper and we will create enormous good paying jobs, union jobs. And that's what we should be talking about. And I'm very fearful that we're not going down that path with our current leadership. In fact, I'm not fearful. I know we aren't going down that path. I'll say this. I know from my work in the energy industry that there are organizations that are dialing back their plans in Texas to invest in renewables because they see what's happening behind the scenes. The Republicans are choking off transmission capacity so you can't get this renewable energy to market. And they're doing it because Republicans suddenly are vilifying renewables, blaming renewables on the grid failure, which is false. So Republicans will take us in the wrong direction. Democrats need to lead on the energy transition.
Seems like Dan Patrick's bad for business. You mentioned now a couple of times companies reconsidering whether Texas is profitable because of the draconian policies that are being pushed forward. Let's talk about how we can get good paying jobs back into Texas and boost the economy.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm glad you brought up good paying jobs, because I get so tired of hearing Republicans pound their chest and claim that they're the ones that understand economics of good paying jobs. I'm sorry, they don't. I come from the business world. I've been creating jobs for 30 years. I don't give them very good marks at all. And all you have to do is look at the unemployment stats, folks. You know, when we came out of the last recession, they called it the Texas miracle. We were at the top of the charts. Now, if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, take August. I don't think the September numbers are out yet or October numbers are out yet, but I looked at August. Look at the unemployment rate, starting at the lowest unemployment, and it gets worse and worse and worse. How far down do you think you have to go until you get to Texas? You have to go all the way down to 35.
Wow.
35 states are doing better than we are in terms of creating jobs. And that ain't right. And there's reasons for this. In order to invest and create jobs in Texas, we need to have a trained and skilled workforce. We have to invest in public education. We got to fix the grid. Companies are not going to create jobs when the grid is rickety. We have transportation issues. We should have expanded Medicaid. That's very, very good for business. And when we think about creating jobs, Antonio, I think we need to be very innovative and think in a new way around creating jobs, which technology enables. And we saw this in COVID. We need to go places and create jobs where jobs aren't being created now. Good paying jobs are not evenly or fairly or equitably distributed across the state. Technology will allow us to do that, but we have to have broadband, which is essential. In parts of the state, we need to create jobs. We also need to create transportation options so people can get to those jobs. We need to deal with the child care so that folks can raise a family and also go to work. I mean, there's so many things that we need to do, and we need to find new and innovative ways to invest in parts of the state that are job deserts. And we aren't seeing any of that out of our state leadership. And it'll be so good for our state when we do.
Yeah. Texas is growing and the population is booming. We just saw the census report come out with massive population growth in the state being led by Hispanics at the top of the demographic population sector. Latinos are growing in population size, but also in political power. And Dan Patrick thinks he's got them figured out. Here's what he recently told Fox News.
What's going to happen in the Rio Grande Valley? That Rio Grande Valley that Trump turned 7 counties for the first time ever from Democrat to Republican, he's going to, not he, but in the 22 elections, when all of us are up, Governor Abbott, myself, the statewides, and congressmen, we're going to turn that whole valley Republican. Hispanics across this country that we've always said share our values, pro-life, for charter schools, lower taxes, economic opportunity, Second Amendment rights, and border security. Hispanics in this country are going to be, I think, the leaders to throw the Democrats out on the rear end for good.
He thinks Latinos are going to make a difference, and he believes he's going to turn the Rio Grande Valley red. Your perspective?
Well, he's not going to turn the valley red if he doesn't go talk to folks in the valley and build relationships. You know, listen, here's the deal. I mean, the party that wins in the valley and in other Hispanic areas of the state, and you know, it's not a monolith, the Hispanic community. I'll tell you who's going to win is going to be the party that goes and talks to people and asks them, what are you worried about in your families? What can we do to help you? That's who's going to win. They're not going to do it just because they have an R stamped in their name. If he's not going down there and talking to people, he's not going to win. I go and I talk to people. It's one of the things that I think I do more than anybody else, I'm proud to say. I've already got a team that we've assembled on the ground. It's the only place where I have a team that's assembled on the ground. Outside of our campaign in the Rio Grande Valley. My experience over several campaigns is this: if you aren't talking to folks about what they care about, then they're not going to give you a hearing. And what people care about is good paying jobs and economic security. They care about great public schools. I heard him say he's pro-charter. Charter is all about hollowing out our public schools. No, sir, he's wrong about that. People are concerned about health care. They're concerned about the safety in their communities. I can tell you, when it comes to schools, when it comes to health care, when it comes to creating good paying jobs, all they do is talk, but they don't deliver the goods. And they aren't in the community talking to people. because people in the community know that they don't deliver the goods. They know that Democrats deliver the goods. We do what we say we're going to do. And so the party that goes in there and talks to people, and again, it's not just the Valley, it's all over the state. That's going to be the party that wins. And for me personally, in my campaign, that is very, very important to us. And by the way, it takes a lot of help. You need people in the community. I mean, I don't know. I think I know, but I might not be right. I need to build relationships with community leaders. So in the Hispanic community all over the state. So we're talking to folks about what they care about and then making sure that we deliver on the promises that we make.
You're absolutely right. As a Latino in Texas, I can tell you the Latino electorate is not as ideologically, linguistically, and culturally diverse, and has a variety of issues that pertain to them that they care deeply about. And it's imperative that both political parties stop looking at the Latino constituency as a given entity and begin to invest as a constituency and engage and recruit and connect with the constituency. You talked about healthcare. Latinos have in Texas, they are the largest uninsured population in the state. Let me ask you, do you support Medicaid expansion?
Yes, of course. I've been fighting for that from the very beginning. Absolutely. Medicaid expansion is morally the right thing to do. It helps families in a big, big way. It's good for our economy. The business community's been for it all along. The fact that Dan Patrick, whom you heard from a minute ago, bragging about all the great things he's going to do, he has fought against expanding Medicaid consistently, unwaveringly, belligerently saying no to a program that will help Latino families.
That's absolutely right. Mike Collier, Democratic candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Texas. Thank you, sir, for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely. And for all of you who are tuning in, don't forget tomorrow's election day in Texas. So make sure you go out and cast your ballot, vote for you, your family, and for Texas's future. And stay tuned.